I'm not persuaded that the items that critical scholars put forward, shifts in tone, shifts in setting, the linguistics and all those things, I'm just not persuaded that those amount to evidence of multiple authorship. In other words, I'm comfortable with the idea of multiple authorship. I really am. If that's what the truth is, I'll accept the truth. But I don't believe that the field of biblical studies produces a reliable and coherent picture of evidence. When
Right.
you have people saying, oh, here are the evidences, but then when you actually read biblical scholarship and you realize that nobody agrees on all these items of evidence, well, then you're left with a position of, okay, maybe there were multiple authors contributing to this book, but I, who they were or how many of them there were is not knowable.
Hmm.
Like, and delineating who wrote this part and here's a transition to another, it's not knowable. It just really is not.
Mormonism with the Murph, where Latter-day Saint explores church history and the church's truth claims. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where Latter-day Saint explores the church's history and the church's truth claims. And I'm excited for today's episode. I'm having an interview with Dan Ellsworth. Dan, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Dan, he is a active believing Latter-day Saint, and he's wanted to come on to respond to a video that I did about Deutero-Isaiah and challenging the multiple authorship view or consensus of Bible scholars. And he's a little bit of background, maybe let you briefly talk about your story for any listeners who aren't familiar with who you are, but I believe you went through a faith crisis, you overcame it, having certain spiritual experiences in your life, and you're involved in sort of ministering to others and in communities, I believe Uplift, Community of Faith. You're involved in that, and you have your own YouTube channel, Latter-day Presentations?
Yeah, Latter-day Presentations.
And you've also done a series on Deutero-Isaiah,
Yeah.
the multiple Isaiah authorship theory on your channel. And you go quite in depth, more so than I obviously did in mine, because I was very much looking at the angle of this is what sort of critics say about the Deutero-Isaiah problem and the implications for Book of Mormon historicity. Very simply, for any listeners who haven't watched that video, many biblical scholars believe that the chapters 40 to 55 were written by a second author of Isaiah after the Jewish exile. So it would have been after Lehi and his family would have left Jerusalem with the brass plates. But I believe chapters 48 to 52 are quoted in the Book of Mormon. And then critics would say, there's no way they would have had that on the brass plates. It wasn't written until after they left. Therefore, it couldn't be on the gold plates. And this is sort of a anachronism or a problem for historicity, sort of a smoking gun. And in my video, I tried to look at some of the critical arguments and also present some apologetic responses as well. But we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But Dan, just tell us a little bit about you, who you are, briefly about your story, and also your interest in biblical scholarship.
Yeah, so you mentioned faith crisis, and I've called it that in the past because that's what people call it, and people, it's a term that people know what you're talking about when you say it, right? But
right
nowadays, I frame it a little bit differently. I think it was more of a developmental crossroads in my faith, right? There comes a time where you come to a realization that things that worked for you in the past are not going to work for you going forward. The way you've approached your faith, the way you've thought about things in the past is no longer going to work. And you have a crossroads, you have a choice to make. Do I walk away, or do I try some new things? Do I look at, okay, how do I grow and develop? and
sort of like from simplicity to complexity,
yeah,
having to nuance maybe some of the simplistic beliefs or assumptions or expectations you might have had.
Yeah, and that transition from simplicity to complexity to simplicity on the other side of complexity, there's a lot there's a lot of pain involved. There's a lot of discomfort that, which is true of any kind of growth that you go through. It always involves, some amount of pain and frustration and kicking and screaming, right?
Yeah.
So that was my situation years ago, and it really was over the field of biblical studies. I was a gospel doctrine teacher facing teaching the Bible, and I I just had this realization that I don't know what I'm talking about with the Bible, and so I dove into the field of biblical studies, and it just it was overwhelming, and I didn't know how to process what I was reading. And especially when it comes to the book of Isaiah. The book of Isaiah is my favorite book in scripture. And but I had some very simple ideas about what it is and how it works. And during that time period, I got exposed to theories of authorship around Isaiah. And okay, you can kind of see the implications for the Book of Mormon and just kind of the nature of scripture altogether.
Yeah.
Is it a human creation where Joseph Smith just kind of was inspired to make it all up, and or was he a fraud, as some of his critics say, and copying Bible passages into this text and so forth? And or is there another explanation? Are there other possibilities to consider? And so working through that took a lot of time and effort.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and reading a lot of biblical scholarship. I I kind of recommend, if you're kind of blindsided by complexity because you've gotten exposed to biblical scholarship, my recommendation is read more of it. Read, don't stop until you've read 10,000 pages
Right.
of biblical commentaries and commentaries about commentaries and
Because often it can seem
articles.
like a very simple case closed
Right.
issue. And some of the criticism you give me in my video, and some of I think was fair, that I'm not an expert in biblical scholarship. So part of me feels tentative diving into this, but I'm doing a series on the Book of Mormon, and my approach is I want to explore every criticism or challenge and look at sort of what critics say. Let's look at their arguments and then explore maybe some of the apologetics. And I didn't really explore or challenge the biblical scholarship itself. That was
Right.
probably something that was different about my approach. I was just looking at what Farrer has to say, or uh, you know, on Interpreter, or Jeff Lindsay, Blake Ostler, but I wasn't really exploring too deeply into challenging the reasons they give for the multiple authorship theory, that
Correct.
Deutero-Isaiah is a separate author. And that was one thing I think you did very well in your series, which I'm going to link and we'll probably talk about a little bit, was challenging some of the reasons they give for later dating or authorship theories, causing it to at least cause more complexity, and that there's a bit of debate or an argument to be had over this.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. And my frustration over church members and this question of biblical scholarship and Isaiah authorship is, you shouldn't have to go and search in a lot of places for information on biblical scholarship around Isaiah. You shouldn't have to do that in 2023,
Yeah.
right? Now in 2023, we have scholars who really know this stuff backwards and forwards, who understand the various arguments and the strengths and weaknesses of the different positions. And there should be a resource somewhere
Yes.
that,
That's
but
accessible.
nobody has produced that.
Yeah.
So here we are in 2023, and people are still having to go all over the place. And okay, let me see what Fair says. Let me see what
Hmm.
critics say. And And that shouldn't be the case in 2023, but here we are,
Yeah,
right?
and I have to say as well that I'm a believer. I'm a believer in Book of Mormon historicity. I strive to be balanced and neutral. I know sometimes you've had some criticisms towards my approach, but I want to find sort of good, compelling intellectual answers. And for the Deutero-Isaiah problem, I remember at the end of the video and I'm researching it, I didn't feel like I found a very good apologetic answer that solved the issue. On some issues, I think there is complexity. There is sometimes different interpretations, and I don't think necessarily every criticism there is going to be a debunking. But I did personally find your videos, if not resolve the issue, provide a very good counter explanation to it. Let's challenge maybe the biblical scholarship a little bit more. Let's listen to some of the other biblical scholars who have opposing reasons to challenge it. And that was maybe something that I didn't present, and that could be something to discuss as well. Like I do know that some of the scholars I've talked to would agree with the scholarship, and that is sort of like the consensus. However, one thing that you said in your videos is just because the scholarly consensus doesn't mean it's definitely true or correct.
Right. Right. And years ago, I made a personal decision in my faith. And that was, and so, I talk about that crossroads where you're making decisions. Okay, how am I going to do things going forward?
Yeah.
And I made some decisions about how am I going to approach faith. And one of the decisions I made was I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
If something is simple, then I'm not going to pretend it's complicated. And if something is really complicated, I'm not going to pretend it's simple. So somebody going through my series on the authorship of Isaiah, you'll find at the end of it, you don't have a solution that's neatly wrapped in a bow because there isn't one. I'm not going to lie and say that
Yeah.
there's this definitive answer that everybody can point to.
Here's
There
the
just
debunking.
isn't. Yeah. I can't pretend that this is an issue that is going to have a neat resolution ever, unless they find more ancient texts and sources and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to pretend that exists. All we can do is examine kind of the strengths and weaknesses of the various arguments and ask some basic questions about how biblical scholarship works and what are the strengths and weaknesses in that field and what are some healthy expectations that we can have for it. And
Yeah.
at the end of that process, again, you're not going to end up with an answer that's neatly wrapped in a bow that resolves all of your questions and every objection. That's not going to happen.
Yeah,
And
so
and
it may
I
not necessarily debunk the Deutero-Isaiah scholarship or the issue, but I think for someone who's really wrestling with it, or somebody who might see it as a smoking gun, like for me, I sort of saw it as this is one of the biggest challenges against the Book of Mormon that I feel like I don't have a great response to. And some people might feel like this is a smoking gun, and then they might watch your videos or other scholarship challenging it. Might frustrate some people because they're like, oh, it's maybe not as straightforward or as simple as that. And I found, at least in my research, as I've been doing my channel, that most issues, there's more complexity to it. As you dive deeper, I've unintentionally been wrong about things, or that there's been more to an issue or a topic, and there's always usually another side. And when you listen to both sides, then you can make more of an informed decision, or what was maybe a big issue may become, a slightly smaller issue, or there could be plausibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing to understand, and this is part of the honesty, right, is that human beings are capable of inventing complexity. And it's a reason why the field of biblical studies has so much conflict just within that field. There are so many scholars fighting with each other over, competing approaches to biblical scholarship, because our normal tendency as human beings is toward disorder and complexity, right? So you have these situations in the field of biblical studies where somebody will put forward a theory, and then people will run with that theory, but they go in such divergent directions with it that years down the line, people just say, okay, this is out of control. This is not even rational anymore. It's not even, we can't even say that this theory has any explanatory value anymore, because we have seen how much chaos people are capable of creating with it. So this is true of questions of authorship. There are a lot of biblical scholars who have just become disillusioned with the whole process of like trying to come up with authors and identify, oh, this section has exactly 5 authors. And then another scholar says, no, it actually has 10 authors. And another says, nope, it's exactly 1 author, right? And that has been going on for so long that a lot of scholars have just said, let's just be realistic. We can't identify authors.
Yeah, we can't know for 100%. There's always going to
Right.
be future ambiguity.
Yeah. So you'll see, for example, with Isaiah authorship, you'll see sometimes people will quote Shalom Paul, who was a great Isaiah scholar, and Benjamin Summer as well. And they hold that Isaiah 40 through 66 were written by one person, one author. And they hold firmly to that view, and they argue it with data, and they defend their positions with, rationality, right? And then you have vast numbers of other scholars who argue, no, it was 15 authors, it was 7 authors, it was 4. And they bring forward their data and their methodology, and they argue from a standpoint of what they consider objectivity, arriving at totally different conclusions. And so once you see enough of that, you say, okay, this is not the kind of enterprise. Biblical scholarship is not the kind of enterprise that is going to tell me what is true.
They can't all be right if they're coming to different conclusions.
Right. So it's not telling me what's true. Well, then if that's not the case, then what is it doing? Well, it's telling me where a group of people lands based on their assumptions, their methodologies that they choose, and so forth. They make decisions that steer them in divergent directions. And when you kind of understand that's what it's doing, that's kind of a more realistic appreciation for what's going on. And it's not, I want to be totally clear about this. I own a lot of biblical scholarship, books, media, all kinds of things. I read it. I consume a lot of biblical scholarship. I consume scholarship written by atheists. I consume scholarship written by believers. I value a lot of what these people say, right? I can see the value in biblical scholarship. I just don't believe that it's like this single source of truth that will tell me exactly what happened with the book of Isaiah. No, it can't promise that reliably, right?
I think I read a quote from you as well. I think I have it on here, but if I don't, I'll paraphrase it. But you say something along the lines of, Latter-day Saints, we shouldn't dismiss or discount biblical scholarship. Like, we shouldn't just say, oh, ignore what scholars are saying and just go off our spiritual feelings and convictions. We should take it into account. But you would probably say we should also challenge some of the biblical scholarship and not always take everything at face value. And I could see some listeners saying, why listen to you, Dan? You're not a scholar. However, I think you're someone who's done a lot of research into biblical scholarship. You've read a lot of books. You've done a lot of research. You have examined the issue, and you have a voice and a perspective, which I think will be important for Latter-day Saints and wherever you are in the believing spectrum, to at least hear another voice or a challenge to the Deutero-Isaiah theory or problem, adding more complexity to it.
Yeah, and I need to be clear about something. We, as Latter-day Saints, we have a lot of literature about the Bible. We have a lot of commentaries written by, BYU professors and general authorities and all kinds of people. They've written a lot of books about scripture. We have a lot of commentaries about Isaiah written by a lot of different people in the church. I will not read or buy or promote any commentaries that lack awareness of critical perspectives on scripture.
Right.
So if somebody says, "Hey Dan, what do you think of this commentary on Isaiah?" I'm going to open it up and I'm going to say, does this author, I don't care if they accept the scholarly approach, the critical scholarly approach to authorship and dating and stuff, but I want to see that they have awareness of the critical scholarly approach.
Yeah.
And fortunately, we do have some scholars now who are producing materials that do have that awareness, and they don't adopt the critical scholarly method, but they have awareness of it and they see the value in it, and they're able to. And so what you'll see is they're a lot more careful in the things that they claim about the book of Isaiah and and other books of the Bible. And that's what I want to see. I just want to see people who are careful and cautious and
So you think some biblical scholars can be very emphatic and dogmatic and very sure about
oh yeah.
dating and interpretations and authorship, when
Yeah.
they should maybe a little bit more hesitant, or there's a little bit more confusion or gray? Seem to have lost you.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. We just had a wee bit of technical difficulties, but Dan's back. Can you continue what your thought was, Dan?
Yeah, like I was saying, we have a lot of commentary on the Bible, Isaiah commentaries that have been written recently and that are being written. And we, some of the scripture commentators in the church, they go some really unfortunate places in their biblical interpretation. So they'll talk about politics and other issues and say, oh, the book of Isaiah is prophesying that you need to vote for this or that candidate, right, in the United States in 2023, or that it's talking about the present day church, and it's identifying this problem in the handbook of instructions, or
not really understanding the historical context that he was writing in.
Right. They assume that what I would hope is that a scholar or a commentator has some awareness of Isaiah scholarship, even critical Isaiah scholarship, so that they can be a little more disciplined in their thinking and a little more cautious about what they claim about the text and its meaning. That is a huge benefit of secular scholarship. When you get awareness of it, you realize, okay, I need to calm down in terms of what I claim about the meaning of these texts. I need to be a lot more careful.
I think you can get almost more out of the text sometimes by understanding the historical context it was written in, and you can read scripture for different purposes. You can read it in a scholarly way, in a critical way, not to criticize but to examine it. You can read it in a more devotional way and liking things to yourself. But I think incorporating both as Latter-day Saints can be helpful, both intellectually and spiritually.
Yeah. So when I read Isaiah, for example, I say, okay, Isaiah is talking to his context, 8th century Judah, and that is his audience, right? And his audience he's not talking to Dan Ellsworth. Okay. So when I read the book of Isaiah, I'm listening in on a conversation, an ancient conversation. And God might have things for me to learn by listening in on that conversation. And that's the devotional part of it. I might read things and just feel impressions like, hey, Dan, you can see how this relates to your experience as well, right? But I don't assume that Isaiah is talking to me and my country and my political party and my groups, right? So that's the value of the scholarly perspective. It is, again, it imposes that kind of discipline in our interpretation.
Right. Great. So Dan, you've prepared some slides, and so I'm
Yes.
going to sort of turn it over to you to go through the slides that you prepare, sort of doing a bit of a response to I think some of the scholars who would support or align with Deutero-Isaiah, the theory, and also maybe some feedback on my video. We'll just have a wee chat about that, but I'll sort of turn it to you to talk us through.
Yes. So can you see the presentation now?
I can, yes.
Okay. All right. So, all right, let me go back to the first slide here. Now, if you look at this presentation, what I have up here is it says agonistic discourse on Isaiah authorship. And agonistic just means a contest of opinions, right? It's a debate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the approach that you took with your video that you did on Deutero-Isaiah. So agonistic discourse, it has a lot of value in a lot of situations, where you're saying, okay, here is a believing perspective versus a critical perspective. And when you do kind of an agonistic approach in your investigation, a lot of times you can kind of identify some strengths and weaknesses of the different positions.
Mm-hmm.
And however, what I want to cover here is some of the limitations to that as well, and why I think the field of biblical studies presents challenges in some ways to the agonistic approach. So,
Okay.
so we talked earlier about, I recommend that you read 10,000 pages of critical biblical scholarship before you form an opinion about it, right? Because I think
that won't be many of us in this world.
Right, but I think this chart really shows kind of the trajectory, where down in the bottom left corner you start out saying, huh? You've come across some information you don't know how to process. And then you read a few things, a few articles, and all of a sudden, hey, I know everything, right? So you have a high confidence level without very much knowledge. And that's kind of normal.
Yeah.
I wrote an article on Isaiah authorship back in 2017, and I was just past the I know everything dot when I wrote that article. I thought I had
I think that was the one I referenced from Interpreter in my video.
Right. So I had only read, I don't know, a couple of books and some articles, and it just I read enough material to have some grasp of some things that are going on in the field, but I thought I got this.
Yeah.
Well, after I published that article in Interpreter, I kept reading, and more commentaries, more articles. And, then you have this, there's more to this than I thought, and I'm never going to understand this. And that's where you get to a point where it's like, wow, this is just too daunting. It's too much.
Yeah.
But you keep going, you keep going, and you just kind of, you read something, and then you walk away from the issue for a while and just live your life and just kind of let it settle in your heart and mind. And then over time, you just keep going. You come back to it and read some more, study some more, and it's starting to make sense. You're starting to see patterns and larger questions at work, and tendencies and biases at play. And you kind of get a larger sense of, okay, what is really going on with this complex question? And at the end of that, when you have a lot of knowledge in the field, ideally you arrive at this point where you say, trust me, it's complicated. So there's a book
Right.
about Isaiah scholarship called New Visions of Isaiah. And it's where, I think it was in 2007, the Society for Biblical Literature brought together some of the top Isaiah scholars in the world. And they had a conference and they wrote papers and shared ideas. And when you read that book, and this is in 2007, so the book of Isaiah in 2007 had been studied and combed over and analyzed for so long by biblical scholars. And when you read that book, you can see they're on that last point. Like, after getting together, they're saying, look, this is complicated. Like, we just don't see eye to eye on even some basic issues with our Isaiah scholarship.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you have people saying things like, look, we don't even read the text in the same way. How can we be expected to agree on questions of authorship and so forth? So
'Cause I don't know if you talk about this here, but I remember in your video you talked about how scholars have to make some choices as well, and obviously scholarship is there to provide a consensus and everyone sort of critically examining things, but there's also some subjective elements in dating things, and you'll probably talk about like prophecy and things like that.
yes. So those are choices. If you make the choice that, okay, I'm not going to consider the possibility of predictive prophecy. Okay, that's a choice, and it's a choice a lot of scholars make, and it's a useful choice because it confines you to, immediate context, and you can do a lot more scholarship by making that choice. It's a useful choice that scholars make. Now, it's a theological choice, right? What you're making a theological claim when you say that prophets only speak to their immediate context.
Yeah, there's no way they could prophesy about future events.
Right, right. That's a theological claim. It's not a claim that you can support with the scientific method or
Because
anything
there's
like that.
similar criticisms towards the Book of Mormon about some of the prophecies in there being quite specific about Jesus being born of Mary, or John the Baptist baptizing Jesus, or his ministry. And some people might think that, oh well, it's a prophecy if Nephi or Moroni wrote about this, but this could have just been Joseph Smith, and some people would view those specific prophecies as this is just Joseph Smith backdating them.
Right.
And that's how some people might interpret it, as this is a 19th century text, and you're saying that scholars might do similar things with the prophecies that they see.
Yeah, so they make those kinds of decisions. And obviously, a classic example in Isaiah studies is the question of Cyrus, the
Yeah.
name Cyrus in in the latter half of Isaiah. So scholars, what you can do in response to that is you can take the believing perspective and say, yeah, there's no reason why Isaiah couldn't prophesy of Cyrus by name. Or you can take the historical critical approach and say, no, this was put in there after the fact. This is a prophecy after the fact. This is
Right.
somebody writing this after this happened. Otherwise, how would they know the name of Cyrus?
Would you have any quick response to a believer or a skeptic who might think, why would Isaiah prophesy very specifically about, Cyrus, the Persian king, but maybe not Jesus by name?
Yeah, so you have those two options that I mentioned. Those are two approaches, but a third approach is to say, some of these, we don't know how these texts were modified through the centuries. And what we do have evidence, and I showed this in my presentations on Isaiah authorship, we do have evidence that the scribes at Qumran, for example, ancient Israelite scribes, they actually modified older prophecies to bring them into present relevance.
Right. Okay. Almost
So
like redacting it, and almost because the prophecies might have been fulfilled, then they make them more specific, you
yes, they
say,
make them
to
more
fulfill prophecy
specific after the fact.
because it's been fulfilled.
Yeah, yeah. And ancient Israelite scribes felt comfortable doing that. They felt like, hey, this is an inspired modification. And they felt comfortable doing that. In our time, in our day and age, you know, we in the modern West might look at that and say, oh, that's not honest, or we kind of impose our modern judgments on how people should treat texts. But ancient Israelite scribes felt very comfortable making those kinds of changes to texts.
Yeah, we have this very inerrantist view of scripture,
Right.
Literally from the word of God, and that it can't be changed or
Right.
modified. And I think that's a Latter-day Saint view as well. Maybe it was influenced by the Reformation, and that's something that I've had to shift my view or understanding of scripture. Understanding that there's been maybe some changes to revelations, and understanding how revelation in scripture works and the process of receiving revelation.
Yes. Yes. One of the biggest breakthroughs for me was years ago. I had breakfast with a Bible scholar who talked about the Dead Sea Scrolls and, how these things used to happen among scribes. And all of a sudden, Joseph Smith made a lot more sense to me. I could actually see, okay, this is I'm imposing my views of how texts should be handled.
Right.
And but ancient Israelite scribes, they were so much more flexible in terms of how they viewed texts. So it is a possibility that a scribe later on inserted the name of Cyrus there.
Right.
That is
I think some of the
totally
scholars I
within the
spoke
realm
to,
of possibility.
yeah, some of the scholars I spoke to as well, like Frank Gardner, Stephen Smoot, sort of said that there's this possibility of the book of Isaiah, that they might have been the primitive writings or words of Isaiah attributed to him, but then later possibly written down by followers. There could be redactions in there. So the book of Isaiah as we have it today may not have been word for word from Isaiah, but that doesn't mean it necessarily was written after the Jewish exile.
Right. And we have another example in the Bible. We have a direct prophecy of Josiah, the king of Judah. And we also, now there's this other question. Well, why wasn't the name of Jesus Christ specified in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, right? Well, my answer to that is, I thought about it and I was like, okay, what if, let's say that in the book of Jeremiah said the Messiah will come forward and his name will be Jesus Christ, and here's the time frame that he will come around. You just know that every single Judean mother in that time frame would name their boy Jesus Christ, hoping that he would be the Messiah, right? And from just a practical standpoint, I can see why God would not reveal the name of Yeshua bin Joseph or whatever, Jesus to Jeremiah or an earlier prophet. I can see why God would keep that name a secret, because it would cause chaos.
We'd have hundreds of Jesuses going around claiming to be the Messiah.
Right. You can kind of imagine, okay, how would that play out in real life if God had revealed the name Jesus as the deliverer of Israel? Every mother would name their kid Jesus and claim he's the Messiah. And I don't know. That's just kind of my take on it. I think there's some practical reasons why it was okay for the name Jesus to be revealed specifically in the Americas to Book of Mormon prophets, but that would have caused problems in Judah, right? So,
but
anyway.
I think this graph is a good representation. Like I can relate to it, because whenever I first went through my faith crisis and I lost my faith, I probably would have went to the second red point if I felt like I knew everything. That was very critical and almost in sort of an arrogant way, and then you realize that there's sometimes more complexity to an issue, and then as you research deeper as well, it just gets a little bit more and more complex. It's not usually as simple as we first think, and
Right.
that can be frustrating, because often we want just simple answers to things.
Yes. And when it comes to the distant past, Nothing is simple.
Yeah. History, scholarship, scripture. None of it's
Right.
simple.
Right. So, and now I want to talk a little bit about bias, because when we talk about agonistic bias and, putting forward different points of view, one of the most valuable things that we can do is understand our biases and the biases of people who we're talking to. And I try to be super upfront about my biases. And I love what you said at the beginning of this. You said you're a believer, you're just being upfront. Okay, I'm going to be biased in the direction of believing. And that, I think there's a lot of value to that. But you have different biases like the experimenters or expectation bias, where people examine something and they find what they expect to find, right? So you have in biblical scholarship and Isaiah studies in particular, if you have a very well-established scholar who sees 15 authors for the latter half of Isaiah, and that scholar has a graduate student earning his PhD and tells him, yeah, this is how many authors there are. Well, guess what? That graduate student, if he wants to be employable, he's probably, as he analyzes the text, he's probably going to come up with a similar number of authors as his
Find probably
PhD
reason and
advisor.
evidence to support that view.
Right, right. So what you see is there are a lot of situations where PhD students adopt the views of their advisors. And some of them don't. Some of them actually challenge their advisors. But some of them they kind of fall into, the pattern that has been set for them, and they find what they expect to find, right? You have irrational escalation or escalation of commitment, and that's where, okay, I've made this commitment to this point of view and now it's challenged, but I'm gonna double down. I'm gonna hold this view even more firmly than I did before. And you'll see this in when scholars argue with each other over the Bible. They challenge each other's views and they very rarely say, oh, you have a good point there. Like, you'll never see a scholar say, oh, I see the validity of your
Yeah,
of
they
your
don't want to give
challenge to my
ground.
view. They escalate and they escalate, and some of those scholarly fights are like, they will go on for years, and they just get more and more intense, and they don't acknowledge, wow, maybe my position isn't as strong as I thought it was.
Mm,
There's authority bias, the tendency to attribute greater accuracy to the opinion of an authority figure. And we'll see a problem with that as we go on in these slides, because I'm going to show you a couple of examples of that. And then there's the bias blind spot, where you assume that you don't have any biases, which is probably the worst bias that any of us can have, is to say, oh, I am objective. I don't have any, because there are so many biases that we are not aware of. Emotional biases, social biases, cognitive biases, different kinds of biases that influence us.
right.
And so part of this process of looking at our sources is saying, okay, this might explain why so many of these scholars, looking at the exact same texts, come to such different conclusions, because they have their biases, right?
Right. No, I would agree with that, because, starting my channel, I wanted to try to be, balanced, objective, do my best to eliminate bias, in the sense where I wanted to, say, fully confront the criticisms or arguments against it. I didn't want to just ignore them and just focus on the faithful evidence, and vice versa. If I were to be more critical, I don't want to ignore all the faithful evidence. But what I've realized as I've been doing it is you can't eliminate a bias, and we all interpret things differently. We interpret evidence, arguments, interpretations differently. What's a big issue to somebody may not seem to another. What seems like a really good supportive evidence may not be to another. And one person being objective isn't the same as another person being objective. So it's kind of subjective.
Yes.
I'm trying to be objective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish that we could just kind of eliminate the shame around the word bias. You know, if you just know that you have biases and that everybody does, it's
Yeah.
okay. Like don't I sometimes worry that people get this sort of scrupulosity where they're like, "Oh, I have to be unbiased. Otherwise I can't figure out what's true." No, that's not accurate. You can arrive some of the most biased questioning arrives at some of the best insights about things. If you are biased as a believer, you're going to ask a very different set of questions than if you're biased as a non-believer, right?
Right. You're
And
more likely to
so,
challenge. You talk about that in your videos, ask tough questions to push back. Whereas if you are a non-believer and you hear evidence to support, say, the Book of Mormon not being true, for example, you're more likely to accept it at face value because you don't really have any stake in it being true, as opposed to a believer might
right.
try to push back more and challenge more because they have more of a stake in it.
Yeah, yeah. So what you'll see, for example, is for me, when I look at the documentary hypothesis, you know, the authorship of the first 5 books of Moses
Yeah.
in the Bible, I I don't care. I'm okay with whatever, you know. If a scholar wants to think that there's 4 major authorial camps or 3 or 2, I don't care. I don't have an I don't feel I don't feel strongly about that.
Mm.
So
You
my
don't really have a dog in the
bias,
fight as much.
I don't have a dog in the fight. So I'm not going to ask hard questions. If a scholar makes a claim that there's only 3 authorial camps, right? Or schools that, you know, I'm not going to challenge that because I don't care. Okay. You know, if you think it's 3, great. I, I, I'm fine with whatever you want to think about that. However, a Jewish scholar, you know, Jewish scholars, when you talk about the Torah, they ask hard questions of each other and other scholars. I mean, they will, you are not going to, your claims are not going to go unchallenged among Jewish scholars. They are really going to ask the hard questions. And that's great.
That's good. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. It's because they have that bias, and that bias actually drives them to ask, you know, really rigorous questions. So the fact that I'm a believer, it is going to lead me to ask different questions than somebody who just doesn't care, right?
Right.
So bias is not a bad thing. That's the takeaway from this slide.
Yeah, and it's important to recognize that we're all biased, and we can be very quick to dismiss people. Oh, they're critics, so they're biased not to believe, so don't listen to what they have to say. Or a believer, you're a believer, Dan, so you're biased to not want to accept the Deutero-Isaiah scholarship, so you know you're not credible. And it's acknowledging that we all have biases, and
Yeah.
to try to just listen to what they have to say and their counter arguments.
Yeah, and I definitely, you know, my bias is toward the our beliefs in the validity of the restoration and our sacred history. That's definitely my bias. It comes from a lot of life experiences and other things, and I totally acknowledge that.
And your
So with that in,
epistemology.
what was
Mhm.
that?
And your epistemology as well comes in to play. You know, if you are open to, say, the divine or
Yeah,
supernatural or miracles versus someone who's not open, that can impact how people, you know, the conclusions they come to as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. So that is why I apply so much critical thinking to critical scholarship. Okay. And here's a good example of that. You quoted David Bokovoy's article. I think it was like a 2-part article
Yeah.
on thoughtful a thoughtful faith. I can't remember what that website is called. But and that I remember reading that years ago, and I didn't really have the I hadn't read enough to really challenge it at the point at that point. But after consuming a ton of biblical scholarship, I employ a little more critical thinking than I did initially toward it, just because I've seen a lot more. You know, I've I've read a lot more. I can ask some more informed questions. So I want to show what that looks like. What does it look like when you ask hard questions of a scholar? And a good example of this is David Bokovoy he's responding to Kent Jackson, and Kent Jackson contributed to a book by Laura Harris Hales, wrote an article about the authorship of Isaiah, and he said there's no manuscript evidence for another author of Isaiah. And David Bokovoy said, another example that calls into question Jackson's familiarity with recent scholarship can be seen in his assertion concerning ancient manuscripts. From the outset, it must be made clear, and here he's quoting Kent Jackson, from the outset, it must be made clear that multiple authorship theories for the book of Isaiah have no support from any ancient manuscripts or traditions. And here Bokovoy says there are two problems with this argument. He says it's not correct. The Great Isaiah scroll, which is the most complete Qumran scroll of Isaiah, leaves a 3-line space at the bottom of a column at the end of chapter 3. Okay, so there's a space between these columns in the Qumran Great Isaiah scroll.
Mm-hmm.
And he says scribal practice suggests that this most likely reflects a scribal recognition of a major division in the book. This is quite meaningful since chapters 34 to 35 share much in common with 24 to 27, which is the so-called Little Apocalypse or Isaiah Apocalypse, and Isaiah 40 through 55. None of this material stems from the 8th century Isaiah. Instead, it was written during and after the Babylonian conquest. Hence, the Qumran scroll marks the division that many scholars believe ends the book of Isaiah proper. To assert, therefore, that we do not have any evidence from any ancient manuscripts that supports the way scholars attribute sections of Isaiah to multiple authors is simply incorrect. We have the Great Isaiah scroll. Now let's unpack, and I've color-coded several of his arguments here in this paragraph. I feel a bias toward challenging this. Right? And so I'm going to ask hard questions of a scholar who makes claims like these. So when he says, for example, that scribal practice suggests that this most likely reflects a scribal recognition of a major division in the book. Well, what scribal practice? Okay, he says that there's some kind of scribal practice that suggests that. Well, what is that? Where is it documented? And what is the source for this claim? I'd like to see a footnote to a book or an article on scribal practices that says, yeah, this is why they inserted breaks in scrolls. But there's no footnote, right? So I would challenge that. And then, here's a picture of the actual Great Isaiah scroll at Qumran, and you can see down, I have a circle where you can see that break.
That's the gap.
Yeah, that's the gap. So it's not even that big of a break, but it's in between. There are 54 columns of text in the Great Isaiah scroll. This break is after column number 27. In other words, it's just right at the midpoint of the text after Isaiah chapter 33. So, and then it continues on the other side with chapter 34.
Okay.
Now, so let's look at his next assertion. This is quite meaningful since chapters 34 through 35 share much in common with 24 to 27. Okay, so also there's no footnote here. And if you read current scholarship, and this is from Joseph Blenkinsop, who wrote this is from his Yale Anchor Bible commentary, which is kind of the gold standard in modern Isaiah scholarship. He says, before we proceed with the commentary, a few additional remarks on chapters 24 through 27 are in order. I noted earlier that this section is not set apart from the rest of the book by introductory or concluding formulae. And he says, since the commentary of Bernhard Doom, which was in 1892, which shaped a lot of Isaiah scholarship, by the way, kind of steered people in a direction. It was really
So was he the one that sort of first came up with the very sort of solidified view or theory?
Yeah. His scholarship kind of, it solidified that 3-part division.
Right.
But he also had some other contributions. I think it was he who invented the notion of the servant songs in Isaiah 50 and so forth. And in the Isaiah 50s, I should say. But he says, and an important contribution by Rudolf Smend, the entire passage, or at least its core components, have nevertheless been known as the Isaiah Apocalypse. Okay. And here, Blenkinsop, one of the world's greatest Isaiah scholars, says if we take Daniel and the Enoch cycle as standard examples of the apocalyptic genre, some features characteristic of apocalyptic are present here. And why is this important, this discussion of apocalyptic? Well, apocalyptic is thought to have come into play as a genre later, after the exile. So if you can say something is an example of apocalyptic prophetic literature, then you can date it late, right? You can say
Right.
it's
So that would be like an
post-exilic.
anachronism they could point to, that it's late
Right,
after the
right.
Babylonian exile.
Yeah, so if you can call 24 through 27 apocalyptic, you can say, oh, it must have been written later, right? And he says some features characteristic of apocalyptic are present here, like resurrection of the dead, the abolition of death, the imprisonment of the heavenly host, but others are lacking. Periodization of history, heavenly journeys, a systematically dualistic way of thinking. And here's his conclusion. In any case, much of the section has nothing in common with apocalyptic. There is therefore a growing consensus that this designation is misleading and should be abandoned. Okay. So that is the state of Isaiah scholarship, according to Blenkinsop, is no, we're not calling this apocalyptic anymore. That was a thing for a time, but no, we don't think that's a good designation for this genre here.
Right. So scholarship's sort of like advancing in its understanding or interpretations of the text.
Right. So if you're going to make a claim that something is apocalyptic, I want to see a footnote. I want to see, okay, are you aware of what Blenkinsop's view is? And, he's claiming that this is a growing consensus. Are you aware of that consensus? I want to see footnotes. I want you to point me to your sources. He says none of this material stems from the 8th century Isaiah. Instead, it was written during and after the Babylonian conquest. Hence, okay, so this is what in deductive logic we would call this a non sequitur. If you say something and then you say this, therefore this, and the second part doesn't necessarily follow from the first, that's a non sequitur. But it's also circular reasoning. And when you see Bible scholars critique each other, they bring up circular reasoning a lot. It's a problem in biblical studies. So, for example, if I say, here's a passage in the latter half of Isaiah, and it contains these words that are late biblical Hebrew because we find them in the latter half of Isaiah. And therefore, they are evidence that this section of Isaiah is late, right? I've kind of led you in a circle. I'm saying this is true because it's true. And
would the implication be that, that late Hebrew wouldn't have been in the, say, earlier chapters of Isaiah, and that's maybe how they could tell, the early scriptural writings maybe didn't have that form of Hebrew. I think you talk about in one of your videos that there's that evidence is kind of scanty for late Hebrew, and you think there's also, I think you point to scholars that there's some evidence in the early scriptural writings of some Aramaic and early Hebrew, but I think that's probably what someone might say in response to that.
Yeah, so there's a huge scholarly fight that has been going on for a long time over whether the evolution of Hebrew can be used to date biblical texts. And the pioneering scholar for that was Avi Hurwitz. He developed kind of a framework for dating biblical texts based on usage of different forms of Hebrew and other words. And so basically he proposed, hey, you can map the evolution of the language, and this is useful for dating biblical texts. But he had some students and some other people like start really challenging that. And it's not just, I mean, you have Joseph Blenkinsop and others saying there's a lot of circularity in those claims around linguistics. You know, if I say, okay, this is late because it's in Isaiah 45, and Isaiah 45 was written later because it has this thing, this Hebrew word that is late. You know, I'm not, you have to point to something outside of the circle, like an
Right.
inscription, for example, an archaeological find or something outside of that circle. Otherwise, it's circular reasoning. I'm dating this late because I find evidence that it's late, and that evidence is evidence that it's late because that's late. You know, it's like, okay, stop. your logic is circular, and it's a huge problem in biblical studies.
Right.
So here he makes another claim. The Qumran scroll marks the division that many scholars believe ends the book of Isaiah proper. Okay, who believes that? Like, just one scholar. Give me one example of a scholar who believes that. I'd love to see one scholar who claims that. And then show me, you know, if you can say, hey, here's one scholar, show me where there's agreement with that scholar on this claim. Is this a consensus? You know what, when you read biblical scholarship, a lot of times they'll put in a footnote where they show like, oh, okay, here are 8 scholars, prominent scholars who agree with this claim. And they will list their names and their work where they agree with the claim, right? There's no footnote here. So that's, for me, when you don't have footnotes, that's a red flag.
So would
Because
that be one of your biggest criticisms with what David Bokovoy has written? Not necessarily that maybe his arguments don't hold up, but he's not provided footnotes to back it up, which caused you to immediately to call into question the claims.
yeah, when somebody is not going to provide a footnote for a claim, that makes me automatically more suspicious of what they're saying. Like,
Right.
okay, why are, you know, it wouldn't take long if you know of all these scholars, it wouldn't take long to just list their names, right? Just do that. And then I could go from there and actually examine the claims.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, here's Joseph Blenkinsop again. Let's hear what he says about Qumran. He says, in view of current widespread unease with the conventional tripartite division of the book. Okay, stop right there. This is the Yale Anchor Bible Commentary, and he's saying that there's so many, he's saying widespread unease. There's a lot of scholars who no longer adhere to the 3-part division of the book. He says the decision to extend the first volume of the commentary to chapter 39, and he's talking about decisions that he's making about, you know, writing this Yale commentary, will inevitably raise questions. Breaking off after chapter 33, the midpoint according to chapters, just as 33:20 is the Masoretic midpoint according to verses, might have been convenient in practical terms, but I see no justification for doing so in terms of the structure of the book. Here's what he says. The commentary will present arguments for the view that chapters 34 through 35 belong together as an apt conclusion to the many sayings about judgment and forgiveness in the preceding chapters, and are not an integral part of chapters 40 through 55. Okay, so he's contradicting David Bokovoy here about chapters 34 through 35. He says and he says the contrary opinion was defended by Torrey in 1928, and his arguments, or at least his conclusions, have been repeated many times since his book appeared. Furthermore, we cannot simply ignore the place and function in the book of chapters 36 through 39, which are integral to Okay. Now look at his conclusion here. The 3-line gap in the Great Isaiah scroll between chapters 33 and 34 has been cited in support of a composition with two equal and thematically related parts. And he cites a scholar here, Brownlee. This is why I want you to give me a footnote, like point me to who says this, right?
Right.
But it may simply be the case that the two scribes who shared the work of transcription agreed to do half each. So let's
Right.
say you and I, Stephen, were given a task. You need to transcribe the book of Isaiah. You do half and you do half. And we just kind of make a decision. Okay, I finished my half. All right, well, now I begin my half. I'll just leave that break right there. Blenkinsop is saying that just may be what happened there.
That might be as equally plausible, or how you could interpret the small division.
Right. Right. So when you make a claim about, scribal practice suggests that this, well, does it? Because here is, maybe the world's leading Isaiah scholar saying, no, it doesn't suggest
and you're
at
saying
all.
that David Bokovoy doesn't provide any reference to support that in other ancient scrolls or documents of that practice
Right.
going on.
Right. So here I'm citing a scholar, Joseph Blenkinsop, who adheres to the multiple author hypothesis. I'm not going to an apologist.
And you say he's a Yale professor?
No, well, I think he's at Notre Dame.
Okay.
But he wrote the Yale Anchor Bible commentary on Isaiah, which is, the world renowned series of biblical commentaries. It's like,
this is a very respectable scholar.
Oh yeah. I mean,
he doesn't hold to the multiple authorship theory.
He does hold to the, multiple,
but he's just disagreeing with this assumption about the right. Okay.
Right. So he's not in the camp of, some evangelical scholars and others who hold to unity for the book of Isaiah. That's not where Blenkinsop is at all. He argues very strongly for multiple authorship. But man, here he is saying this about the gap in the Qumran scroll and what you can and cannot conclude about it. Right.
Gotcha. So we should be a little bit more careful saying that the gap therefore means this is another author.
So the honest truth the honest truth about the gap in the Qumran scroll is it means nothing at all. Like there's nothing you can conclude about it in any shape or form about the authorship of Isaiah. It is not evidence for anything. It does not indicate anything. That's the honest truth about the gap in the Qumran scroll. Now, if you are a scholar like William Brownlee, who wants to see kind of a pattern of, equal divisions in the book of Isaiah, then you will use that gap as evidence for something that you have already decided. And Brownlee does that.
Kind of confirmation bias, isn't it?
Yes.
Trying to see information and to sort of incorporate into what you already believe as evidence.
Right. So Brownlee does that, and Brownlee's a good Isaiah scholar. I'm not saying Brownlee is, but he put forward a hypothesis, and a lot of people say, I don't think I don't see that. It's fine if you claim to see that, that like half and half division of the book of Isaiah, but I don't see that.
Right.
So anyway,
so I think what you're sort of highlighting is to be more careful and critical of some of the claims that are made by maybe certain scholars, which maybe they're not citing sort of a source, or there's other scholars who may not interpret it that way. It's not definitive.
Right.
It's an assumption.
Correct. And now, so this is a segment of Bokovoy's article that you had in your video, where he says there are several compelling reasons for why Isaiah 40 through 66 is not a prophecy given by the historical Isaiah. Number one, Deutero-Isaiah provides a polemical response to the Cyrus cylinder. Well, there's no reason to believe that the author of Isaiah had any awareness of the Cyrus cylinder if you read current scholarship. Lena Sophia T. Meyer produced a book called For the Comfort of Zion. Now, this is another scholar who holds to the multiple authorship view. She's not like an evangelical conservative who holds to unity on Isaiah. She's a critical scholar, one of the best critical scholars on Isaiah in the world. And she wrote this book in like 2010 for the Comfort of Zion, where she just destroyed this idea of a relationship between the Cyrus cylinder and Isaiah 45, I think it was, right? She absolutely eviscerates that whole view in her book, right?
Right.
So the next one, Isaiah believed in the inviolability of Jerusalem. No, he didn't. That is something that scholars have imagined about Isaiah. And there's reasons to believe that at some points he might have believed that. But could his view have been nuanced? Yeah. Or could he have changed his mind over 35 to 40 years of his prophetic ministry? Why not? Right? There's sometimes this assumption that, oh, at this snapshot, in this point in time, here's a passage that says what Isaiah thinks about this. And he can never change his mind. Otherwise, it's a different author.
Right. Because I remember whenever I exchanged messages with a certain Bible scholar, he said it was one evidence was the shift or change in tone. I think he also talked about, I don't think this is one of the lists that David Bokovoy has, but that Isaiah talks on first person in Proto-Isaiah, and he used that as another reason that it doesn't seem to be in first person and talking about sort of the going to Babylon like it's already happened. I think he gave a couple of those reasons.
Yeah. So there are and that shift in tone and perspective, that's something that scholars cite as evidence for another author, but you don't have to conclude that. I mean, that's not evidence for another author. That's an evidence that there was a shift in perspective. Or that's all there is, And I covered that in my series. You have some critical scholars who are saying, come on, that's ridiculous. The idea that a prophet can't change his perspective, can't change his mind, or just have like a new understanding of something that he once thought.
Especially with maybe changing geopolitical conditions.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. You think so during the time of Isaiah, the northern kingdom was conquered. And you had this massive influx of refugees who spoke Aramaic coming down from the northern kingdom. That happened during his lifetime. That would be like, I mean, it's hard to even analogize in our day and age how much that would impact you if that were your experience. You think Isaiah's not going to have like some awakenings of new understanding of things, some shifts in perspective with all this geopolitical upheaval? Again, scholars make these really, really narrow assumptions, and there's no reason to hold to those. So, but anyway, here's Joseph Blenkinsop in one of his books. He says, so he's talking about this idea of the inviolability of Jerusalem and in the writings of Isaiah. He says, where we encounter such language about inviolability throughout the book, and not just in the authentic sections, it more often than not refers to an ideal construct over against the empirical reality. Isaiah himself does not hesitate to compare this real Jerusalem with Sodom. In other words, like you're about to be destroyed, right?
Right.
You're like Sodom. Denounce it as a harlot city and hold out the prospect of ruin and destruction. Only in one saying, probably from the time of Hezekiah's rebellion, does he speak of Yahweh fighting for and protecting his city, though even in this instance, there are conflicting interpretations. All right?
Right. So you're saying that, David Bokovoy believed that the original Isaiah wouldn't have believed that Jerusalem could have been destroyed, but this scholar here, Joseph Blenkinsop, is pointing to some verses that this is maybe referring to his sort of like an idealistic view of Jerusalem. So is that sort of the argument?
Yeah. I mean, it's numerous scholars have said, oh yeah, Isaiah believed in the inviolability of Jerusalem. He held to this tradition, that was common among ancient Judah. Well, Blenkinsop is saying, like, you're overstating your case, guys. He's saying, look at these other things that Isaiah said. Why do you ignore this evidence that his view was a lot more,
So holding out for the possibility of like ruin and destruction,
yeah,
calling Jerusalem like a harlot city.
right. So the inviolability of Jerusalem, like, again, I'm going to challenge these things. I'm going to ask hard questions. If a scholar says, oh, Isaiah believed in the inviolability of Jerusalem, therefore these passages, well, I'm going to ask hard questions. I'm going to read Joseph Blenkinsop and other scholars. I'm going to say,
See
is
if they
that
agree
really
with
true?
that conclusion.
Right.
Well, that's
So,
important.
yeah, so let's talk through another one. The authors of 40 through 66 present a message of comfort to the Judean exiles that directly counters Isaiah's theological conviction. So
Yeah, I've
imagine
heard that
this.
argument.
Yeah, we've already heard this. But I, as a scholar, determine the things that Isaiah believed, and those are fixed, and those don't change. And there's no, and therefore, if I see something later on that contradicts that, because I've come up with this mental construct of what Isaiah only ever believed, then gosh, that must be, a different author later on.
Right. So like the change in perspective or
Yeah,
tone, and also you could just believe that it's like God as well, like the revelation of the message changing.
right. So as a basic exercise, after we're done with this video, go read Isaiah 8 and then read Isaiah 12. And tell me what you see. Well, think about what you're seeing in terms of a shift in perspective and a shift in tone. This is Isaiah 8 and 12, which pretty much every scholar is going to agree is Isaiah material, right?
Right.
Huge shifts in perspective and tone. He says the authors of 40 through 55 know Jeremiah, but Jeremiah does not know these prophecies. So this is an argument made by Kenton Sparks. He's an evangelical scholar. And he's saying, oh, you have like some of these prophecies, if they had been written before the time of Jeremiah would have included them in his prophecies, because he does include a lot of Isaiah stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And well, why do we assume that? Why do we assume that Jeremiah, number one, wouldn't have made specific judgments about things to include or not to include? That he wouldn't have had a good reason to exclude those items? Or why do we assume that Jeremiah had all of these writings, that there wasn't like an Isaiah archive here and then another Isaiah archive here in another location, and an Isaiah archive held with his descendants outside of the scribal schools or archives, right? So there's a lot of things that we're assuming when we say, oh, Jeremiah would have included these prophecies if they had been written. And we don't have to make those assumptions. That's an argument that rests on a number of assumptions that if you just give them a little bit of thought, they kind of fall apart.
I know Blake Ostler, in my interview with him, I think I remember him pointing to like the book of Psalms and Ezekiel as well as Jeremiah, drawing upon
Yes.
Isaiah, and
Yes.
they would have supposed to be written after, and he believed that they're sort of, that shows like a dependence on the book of Isaiah. I guess he must be referring to Deutero-Isaiah passages there being that intertextuality as well, and he saw that as reasoning to maybe go against the multiple authorship of Isaiah theory.
Right. So and he's correct. You see in Ezekiel, you see decisions about Ezekiel doesn't use that much Isaiah material. He only uses a few things. Jeremiah borrows from Isaiah like crazy. I mean, Jeremiah borrows from everybody like crazy. he is just this giant vacuum of scripture. He just vacuums up these ideas from
like a sponge.
yeah, and he is weaving in so many ideas from different prophets, much more so than Ezekiel. But so anyway, when you make a claim like that, you're making assumptions about exactly what was going on in a prophet in Jeremiah's head. And all you're really saying is, here's what I would have done if I were Jeremiah. Well, guess what? Kenton Sparks, you're not Jeremiah. You don't know what his priorities and his strategy was, right? The authors of 40 through 66 knew exilic and post-exilic material, including Lamentations. That's because if you've already assumed that 40 through 66 is late, then that assumption determines the direction you assign to borrowing between texts. And you can't use that as evidence for something that you've already assumed. Again, that's circular reasoning.
Right. So he's assuming Deutero-Isaiah was written after the Babylonian exile, so it would have been borrowing from Lamentations. But if the Book of Isaiah would have been written before, then it's Lamentations borrowing from Isaiah.
Yeah. There's no, like, when you assume Deutero-Isaiah, everything becomes evidence for Deutero-Isaiah, right?
Right. So that doesn't necessarily determine that chapters 40 to 55 were written later.
Right.
It's borrowing.
Right. So this is not unique to biblical studies. This is in even in the hard sciences. When people assume a particular theory is correct, everything becomes evidence for that theory, right? All of a sudden it explains everything. So it's not unique to biblical studies. Deutero-Isaiah shows signs of Aramaic influence, but we don't see this in the oracles of the historical Isaiah. Well, if you assume that, hey, these are the oracles of the historical Isaiah and these other things aren't, then wow, but you have kind of created this artificial target of what constitutes, the historical Isaiah. Now, we know that Isaiah lived in a time of...
Can I ask, we follow up on that one? So the point he's making is that there's, Aramaic influence in the writing for the, chapters 40 to 55, which they would date to being after the Babylonian exile. Is there any example or evidence of Aramaic in scriptural writings before the Babylonian exile? Do you know?
Oh, yeah.
I think I remember you talking about that in one of your videos.
Yeah. There are a lot of books of the Bible, pre-exilic books, that have a lot of Aramaic influence. There's no escaping it. The northern kingdom of Israel, their neighbors, their language was very heavily kind of an Aramaic heavy dialect, I should say. But they were also really heavily influenced by Assyria and Babylon. So you're going to see a lot of Aramaic and Akkadian influences on the biblical text. This is not unique to the book of Isaiah. This happens all over the Bible.
Right. And so this isn't a good thing to point to.
No.
That shows that it's a later written text.
Right. And there are so many scholars who have dismantled this idea in so many places and just shown, like, how selective the reasoning is here, right? Deutero-Isaiah shows signs of post-exilic Hebrew. Again, the question of linguistic dating is very much contested. So there's a book called Linguistic Dating of Biblical Texts, and you can read that and you can kind of see, some of these arguments around there. There are so many things that you can read where scholars are arguing with each other over the validity of these kinds of claims. And there's no footnote here pointing the reader to, hey, I side with this particular scholar making this claim. And here's why I don't side with these other scholars, right? There's none of that kind of work that would allow the reader to say, okay, is this claim valid? Is that really the state of scholarship? Is that really what scholars believe or not? And have things changed? Or is this like a 75-year-old claim that has been refuted, right? So that's why when I talk about bias, bring a bias when you engage with, critical scholarship, bring a bias of like skepticism
Right.
and ask hard questions, demand footnotes, demand sources, demand data, right?
Right. Think critically examine, challenge. I think for a lot of people as well, when it comes to like a topic like biblical scholarship, it's not an area that I feel confident or have expertise in. I think
Right.
even the average member, even someone who's maybe feels that they've done their fair share of research into more things to do with church history, biblical scholarship, it's very much getting into the weeds and it can be very complex. And often you can just go with, a Bible scholar who's got way more knowledge and expertise in their
Yes.
field.
Yeah. That is absolutely true. And that's why I recommend, if you have the stomach for it, then read a lot of this stuff. But some people, they're going to read it and it just gets exhausting and it's like, I'm never going to get it, whatever, right? and that's okay too. I mentioned earlier Lena Sophia T. and her book For the Comfort of Zion. So here is one of the pages where, and this is her introduction to a chapter where she goes through these arguments around Babylonian influence. Okay, the Cyrus cylinder and Akkadian and all these other kinds of things that people point to and say, oh, this is Babylonian influence, therefore it was written either during or after the exile. So her argument in her book is that no, 40 through 55 were written in Judah. They are not influenced by Babylon at all. And okay, so I've laid out the text of that page here. She says in this intro to that chapter, as we shall discover, most, if not all, of these claims do not support a Babylonian setting of Isaiah 40:55, but presuppose it. Okay. This is one of the greatest Isaiah scholars in the world. She is the editor of the Oxford Handbook on Isaiah.
Right.
And she's saying, when you presuppose a Babylonian setting, then yeah, you're going to say that, oh, all of these things justify this claim that I presuppose, right?
Right.
So, and she says, I shall begin with a general discussion of the methods involved in comparative studies of the Bible and the ancient Near East. So in this book, she's like, okay, we have to walk through, like, how do scholars even do their work? And to arrive at these conclusions, we have to talk about method, showing what one can and cannot prove. So she's gonna give you a workout. Like she's gonna show you, this is, people claim that this proves that. No, it doesn't.
Right. Can you
She's
definitively come to the conclusions that you're reaching? What's your methodology for getting to that position?
Again, she's going to impose some discipline because scholars like to make these wild claims of this proves that or this demonstrates that. No, it doesn't. But she says both the Neo-Assyrian and the Neo-Babylonian empires exercised considerable influence over Israel and Judah from the 8th century BC, the time of Isaiah, onwards. We should therefore not be surprised to find a relatively large degree of shared phenomena between the ruling superpower and the state of Judah living in its shadow, both in terms of language. Again, there's the Aramaic and Akkadian, right? And with regard to societal, cultural, and religious matters. I shall also discuss the Akkadian influence on the language and literary style of Isaiah 40 through 55 and argue that nothing in 40 through 55 necessitates a Babylonian-based author. In particular, I shall investigate the alleged similarity between 44 and the Cyrus cylinder, as well as the potential Akkadian influence on the so-called self-predication formula found throughout 4155, 48, 49, 51. In addition, I shall look briefly at the latest research pertaining to the development of the Hebrew language and what the characteristics of the Hebrew of Isaiah 40 through 55 can tell us about its geographical origin. Okay. So she's like, okay, we're going to go and confront all of these supposed evidences for Babylonian influence. We're going to confront those head on. And she does.
Examine, test them.
Yeah. and when you read this section of her book, it's very dense, but she, again, she's going to show you both sides. Here is this school of thought that these scholars hold. Here's an opposing school. Here are the strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
That is what it means to be a rigorous scholar. And that's what she does in her book. It's fantastic.
And what's the name of her book?
Her book is called For the Comfort of Zion.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and again, she's the editor of the Oxford Handbook of Isaiah. This is not some anonymous scholar. This is not some, scholar, whoever. Like, she is very well published. She is.
And does she hold to the unity of Isaiah, or does
No,
she
no,
still
she
holds to
doesn't.
multiple authorship, but she's rejecting some of the
Oh,
evidence
yeah.
assertions the
Oh,
scholars are
yeah.
making? So she has
Yeah.
more credibility. She's not some fundamentalist
Right. I am not
scholar.
quoting an evangelical scholar to you here. I'm quoting a scholar who holds to
Right.
the multiple authorship theory. Right. So, and that's why, I, when I quote these scholars, I'm trying to show that, like, these objections to all of these various points of evidence don't come from evangelicals. Occasionally they do, but man, this is other scholars who are, historical critical. They're utilizing the historical critical method.
Hmm.
So this is
If I
secular
were to ask a
scholarship.
question, because she's rejecting some of, or sort of like countering some of the reasons that certain Bible scholars were giving for, Deutero-Isaiah being written in Babylon, but if she still holds in the multiple authorship theory, can you articulate what sort of like her main reasons for that? And
She
then,
doesn't actually give, like, she kind of assumes Deutero-Isaiah, which is what a lot of scholars do. And like, if I were to go pursue a degree in biblical studies right now, I would assume multiple authorship for the Torah, for the first 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch.
hmm,
I would assume that, because I don't have a dog in the fight, right? So
it's kind of the predetermined scholarly
yeah, I would assume
consensus.
it. I would assume it. If I were to write papers on that, I would say, yeah, this might be the work of what scholars call J. This might be the P source. And I probably wouldn't challenge it that hard, because I don't care. I don't really have a dog in the fight. And I just reading her stuff, I think she's just kind of in that same vein.
Hmm.
Though
It's
I would
interesting that
love,
she's like critically examining the reasons they're giving for it, but yet she's not critically examining whether or not she holds to multiple
yeah.
options or not.
Yeah, I would love to see her do that, because I think she could eviscerate the whole theory if she wanted to.
She's that good.
But she's not going to. I don't think she has, kind of that bias toward against the theory itself, right?
Hmm.
But at some point, but she does talk about her bias. She doesn't like consensus. And so she saw this consensus about, oh, this Babylonian influence, and she's like, I'm going to tear it apart. And she did very effectively.
Right. And I
So,
guess that's good in a way to challenge some things. And often we don't like if people go against the consensus or if they challenge, our beliefs. And like, for example, this is a different topic, but I had a conversation with a woman, I think her name's Michelle Stone, about
yeah,
polygamy. And I disagree with her. I believe Joseph Smith practiced polygamy. I think there's good evidence to support in the history. However, she was offering her counter explanations challenging. And I thought it was kind of interesting, the points and arguments she was making, even though I didn't agree with them. But I think it can be interesting for people to think and to challenge some things that we've just assumed or taken at face value.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm with you, on that particular subject. I think Joseph Smith did practice polygamy,
Yeah.
but I welcome challenges to assumptions.
Yeah.
If Michelle Stone or others are saying, hey, there's problems in some of the historiography that, that has been employed by Latter-day Saint scholars, gosh, bring forward those challenges. Go for it.
Yeah, she challenged me to dig a little bit deeper, and I read an article by Brian Hales, and he sort of responded to that directly.
Yeah,
And to me, I just felt like there's too much evidence. It would be one huge conspiracy However,
Yeah.
it was good to hear someone push back a little bit, and I think
Yeah.
that's sort of the point here. And this is a very reputable scholar
Yep.
challenging some of those, some of those positions some scholars have held on Deutero-Isaiah.
Yeah. She's awesome. She's awesome. Again, this is not like an evangelical scholar that I'm throwing at you. This is a secular critical scholar, right? Okay, so now let's talk about your discussions with Brant Gardner, Stephen Smoot, and Blake Ostler. And before we do that, so you talked about these in your video. Before we do that, I want to show you something. This is Christine Hayes. Now, she put together this fantastic online course for Yale University. It's the Intro to the Old Testament, right? And I highly recommend it. If you want to get exposure to kind of critical scholarship on the Old Testament, her series is fantastic. It's really great. But when she got to Isaiah authorship, look at what she said. She said, among the scrolls that were found in the caves at Qumran near the Dead Sea, we have a very large and famous Isaiah scroll, which is now in a museum in Jerusalem. On the scroll, there is a gap after Isaiah 39, and a new column starts with Isaiah 40. So it seems to signal some sort of implicit recognition that there's a difference between these two sections. They are not the same unit, not the same author, perhaps.
Okay, so she's having the same interpretation or conclusion as David Bokovoy and other scholars would take of the gap between chapter 39 and 40.
Well, there's a problem, though. The gap isn't between 39 and 40. It's between 33 and 34. She's just flat out wrong.
Right.
Yeah, it's between 33 and 34. It's not 39 and 40. So how did Christine Hayes, an Old Testament scholar, put forward the idea that that's where the gap is in her presentation?
It fits with the Deutero-Isaiah authorship theory.
Yeah. So if your mind is
between 34 to 35, you showed that, didn't you, on a previous slide? That's only just catching me now.
I did show it. And like, I would invite anybody, research and see if she's right about this or not.
Right, that's quite a big error, like, to get wrong. If you're a Bible scholar and just like
it's
quite an important detail.
Error. Now, how did she make this mistake though? Well, in her mind, so she probably honestly has not dug very deeply into Isaiah scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
It's not her area of expertise, not her focus of her dissertation, not her focus of her research. And she knows that, hey, there's always been kind of this assumed division between 39 and 40, and then 55 and 56.
Yeah.
And she heard that there's a gap in a Qumran scroll. And in her mind, it gets pieced together that that's where the gap is. Right. And it's not true. It's just flat out not true. And she taught her students this.
And completely unintentional.
Right.
I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, totally unintentional. But puts it forward as evidence for not the same author, perhaps. Right. And so when you ask questions about scholarly consensus, so she's part of the consensus, but how deep is her understanding of the scholarship? Obviously not very deep.
Mm-hmm.
If she's going to make a claim like this in her class.
Right. That's a very important detail for people to be aware of.
Hugely important detail. And she missed it and just, said the wrong thing. It's just factually not true. And so when you talk to scholars, that's why it's important to say, okay, where is your depth of expertise? Because that's where we're going to focus. If I'm going to interview you about the authorship of Isaiah, we're going to go to your area of expertise.
And not all Bible scholars are necessarily experts in the Book of Isaiah.
A lot of them are like how I am with, the authorship of the Pentateuch. I don't care. Yeah, there's a scholarly consensus that it was multiple authors. I'm good with that, whatever, and I might read a few things. If I were giving a presentation on it, I'd read up on a few of the latest scholars and their views, but I wouldn't go in depth into it, right? Whereas a Jewish commentator would go into a lot of depth because they have an interest in doing that. So not every scholar, their areas of expertise vary. And if Isaiah is not your area of expertise, you're just going to assume, hey, that's the consensus, and here's a data point, and it might even be wrong, or it might be outdated, right? So before you talk to scholars, understand their expertise, be prepared to be really specific. So specific points of evidence, and then ask about contrary views. If I say, for example, oh, what about this Aramaic word in Isaiah 43? Let's say I asked a scholar that, and the scholar said, well, yeah, that's evidence for multiple authorship. Then ideally I could say, well, there's a scholar who disagrees with you. Do you see the strength of his position as well? How would you answer his objection to your view here?
Right.
The more specific you can be, the better. That way you can avoid a situation like, what with Christine Hayes telling people something that's completely false about the Qumran scroll. And then also being prepared to discuss paradigms, right? Even in Isaiah scholarship, there have been some huge paradigm shifts where some scholars have gotten so exhausted and like disillusioned with historical criticism that they've transitioned to looking at the text in a whole different way. And they call it canonical criticism, right? And so that's their new paradigm. Well, what is, if I'm talking to an Isaiah scholar, I'm gonna want to understand to the best degree possible what their personal paradigm is. So then I can ask them some good questions. Now with Brant Gardner, I would ask him about some specific points of evidence and language and things like that. I don't know if he has like
expertise.
Yeah, I don't know if he has like serious expertise in Isaiah studies. He might have. I don't know. I've never actually talked with him.
I wouldn't have the impression, because we did an interview and it was about the Book of Mormon, historcity of the Book of Mormon, which would be more his area of expertise. Looking at the Mayans. And
yes,
we did a series of just him responding to some criticisms, just get his take on it. I did something similar with Stephen Smoot and Blake Ostler, but I'm sure he was aware.
But Brant Gardner might be able to talk about, how do you think about the relationship of translation models to the text of Isaiah in the Book of Mormon? He'd be able to go in a lot of depth on that. That's his area of expertise. Stephen Smoot has, just looking at what he's written in Interpreter, for example, he has a lot of depth on historiography and like critical thinking about historiography. If I were gonna ask him about Isaiah scholarship, I'd say, okay, we need to talk the historical critical method and help us understand like how that works with Isaiah studies, and what are the strengths and weaknesses, what are healthy expectations for it versus unrealistic expectations. Blake Ostler is one of the greatest minds that you will find in critical thinking and reasoning and rhetoric and logic and those kinds of things. And I showed you earlier in this presentation, that's massively important as you're reading biblical scholarship. The ability to say, okay, here's a problem in logic with this scholar.
Yeah.
Here's circular reasoning. Here's a tautology. Here's a non sequitur. Here's an appeal to authority. Blake Ostler, he does have a good grasp of biblical studies. He really does.
Yeah.
But man, you're not going to find anybody stronger on like just how to think, period, about scholarship.
Well, sure. He wrote that article on the expansionist theory of the Book of Mormon, I think when he was my age, like 26, I think he was, or maybe younger.
Yeah, crazy. and I love, by the way, just as a tangent, I love that theory and I hold to it.
Yeah, I think it's a great theory for acknowledging some of the maybe 19th century elements and understanding maybe
Yeah.
Joseph's role in the translation, but
Yeah.
also, he also looks at things which seem to have some ancient authenticity or
Yeah.
beyond Joseph Smith, and then combining that with you know, research into Gardner's work or John Sorensen,
Yep.
Book of Mormon Central, of things which seem to correlate with ancient historicity for the Book of Mormon. That needs to be taken into account as well. And I appreciate his theory. Sure, it's caused me to have to shift in many ways
Yes.
my previous view of the Book of Mormon, but I feel like those things need to be taken into account as well, and
Yep.
not just dismissed, by critics if you're trying to be balanced and fair and objective. Need to account for those things as well.
Yeah. But if you look at the expansion theory and reading the book of Isaiah and understanding that Isaiah might be doing expansion in some of his prophecies,
Mm-hmm.
right? These ancient prophets might have been doing it. So I love Brant Gardner's work on Book of Mormon translation, Blake Ostler's expansion theory. My view is like a salad of all of those things, right?
Right.
I think there's a
And
lot
I
of truth
think
in that.
even Scarson's moving more towards a cultural translation, whether or not he believes it
Yes.
was, appearing, being transmitted onto the stone.
Yep.
I see a lot of that as sort of conjecture. I think we're all a bit agnostic as to the mechanics, but they're sort of
Yeah.
moving that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. Anyway, that's a whole nother subject that I love to
Yes,
talk
we won't
about.
get into that.
But I want to also point to the fact that we have some really great Isaiah scholars in the church now. Carrie Muhlstein just produced a commentary on Isaiah that's fantastic and shows that critical awareness that I talk about, just the awareness of scholarly understanding of the book of Isaiah. Sean Hopkin, he with the late Ann Madsen, they produced this harmony of the book of Isaiah, the King James text. I think it's King James, Book of Mormon text, and Dead Sea Scrolls all together. Super interesting. Josh Sears, in this recent volume, They Shall Grow Together, he has this awesome article on the multiple Isaiah theory there. And it probably gives like your best summary of, okay, what's the current state of Latter-day Saint thinking on that topic.
Mm-hmm.
These are really, really great scholars. And they have, a lot of depth in biblical studies and exposure to that field. They know what they're talking about. And so we return to this, Stephen. uh, Having talked through a lot of these things, you know, I I I guess all I can say to the readers is trust me, it's complicated.
Yeah, definitely.
It just is.
Yeah.
Like if
And,
somebody tells you that this is straightforward and simple, then be skeptical of that because
yeah.
it's complicated.
And that's one thing. And it can be frustrating when you want to challenge uh, an assertion, and let's look at the other side. Let's challenge it, see how strong the argument is, because we want things to be simple. But with most issues, in my experience, there normally is another side, or there's more
Yeah.
complexity.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask you maybe just a couple of like
Yeah.
finishing questions
Sure. Go ahead.
that maybe listeners might have? So is the point of so I'd like to get your views on Isaiah authorship. I think you would hold more to the unity of Isaiah, but maybe you're open to sort of like redaction or editing by perhaps a later scribe. But is your point to say that this can kind of be debunked? The Deutero-Isaiah authorship theories, is your point to sort of say that what, there's complexity and there's debate among scholars and it's not a case closed? Like, what's sort of your general point of this presentation, and where do you come down in your view of
So my view
authorship?
is not going to make anybody happy. Anybody. Nobody's going to be happy with my view. My view is that Isaiah did not write all of the book of Isaiah. Period. And I say that because there are parts of the book of Isaiah where you have people talking about Isaiah, like it's third person.
Right. Yes.
So
And that's one of
obviously,
the reasons that a Bible scholar gave to me for
yeah,
not believing he wrote it because it wasn't in
Right.
first person.
Right. So, if somebody were writing, if I were writing my autobiography and a collection of things I've written, and then there's a section where it says, and here's where Dan did this. Here's where, and I'm automatically I'm transitioning to a third person voice. Then you're going to say, okay, there must be an editor writing here. This isn't Dan writing.
Right.
So we see that in the book of Isaiah. Now, I'm not persuaded that the items that critical scholars put forward, shifts in tone, shifts in setting, the linguistics and all those things, I'm just not persuaded that those amount to evidence of multiple authorship. In other words, I'm comfortable with the idea of multiple authorship. I really am. If that's what the truth is, I'll accept the truth. But I don't believe that the field of biblical studies produces a reliable and coherent picture of evidence.
Right.
When you have people saying, oh, here are the evidences, but then when you actually read biblical scholarship and you realize that nobody agrees on all these items of evidence, well, then you're left with a position of, okay, maybe there were multiple authors contributing to this book, but who they were or how many of them there were is not knowable. Like, and delineating who wrote this part and here's a transition to another, it's not knowable. It just really is not.
So a lot of it's them filling in the gaps or
yeah,
assumptions
and that's
or
what,
how they're interpreting it.
yeah, and that's what Deutero-Isaiah is. Deutero-Isaiah is not a person. Deutero-Isaiah is not a group of people. Deutero-Isaiah is a concept that scholars use to fill in gaps. Because if you decide in advance that Isaiah could not have written this because of, I make these subjective judgments about theology or about shifts in tone or whatever, if I decide based on those kind of subjective judgments that there must be multiple authors, and I make those kinds of judgments sometimes too, by the way, right? But if I make those decisions, then I have gaps to fill. Well, then who did write it? And how many authors were there? Where where were they, right? And I have to fill those gaps in somehow, which is what scholars are trying to do in Isaiah studies. And they don't agree with each other. They don't have a coherent picture. But they call this Deutero-Isaiah, and it's a concept. You can't point to, hey, this is a person or a group of people. Like I said before, Shalom Paul and Benjamin Summer insist that 40 through 66 are written by one person. Hugh Williamson has very sharp disagreements with both of them on the relationship of these parts of the text. And, after a while, you just say, okay, I see what you all are doing and I see value in it, but it doesn't present a coherent picture where I can say, oh, this is who wrote the second half of Isaiah, or this is who wrote this passage versus that passage. You can't do that based on biblical scholarship. You just can't. So that's my position is I'm flexible. I'm just not persuaded that biblical scholarship is a reliable
Right. Yeah, not fully
system.
reliable.
Right.
What would you say to a skeptic or maybe an unbeliever who thinks that, you're just trying to ignore the scholarly consensus and, picking a few scholars? Not from what you showed me, they seem like very reputable scholars, but they might think you're just picking a few scholars to discredit some of the reasons for it because of you don't want the implications of Deutero-Isaiah because that the impact it might have on Book of Mormon historicity, and it's a minority of scholars who hold the unity of Isaiah. What would be your response to someone who said that?
So I've heard that, and there's validity to that. I'll just acknowledge that. My belief in the historicity of the Book of Mormon, it constitutes a bias. I'm going to ask really hard questions because I have that bias, right? I'm going to ask harder questions than somebody would if they did not have that bias. And Now, as far as cherry picking scholars go, absolutely. So first of all, if you claim a consensus, I need you to show me who that consensus is. And I talked about this in my presentation, how you have biblical scholars acknowledging that, okay, A, there's like almost no consensus in the field of biblical studies on anything nowadays. And B, when people claim consensus, it's not because they've like taken a vote, or they can like point to, hey, here are the majority of scholars. Like there's no, it's just a claim that's not supported by anything. Like claims of consensus are the worst kinds of claims because they're just made out of thin air. Oh, the people I know form a consensus, or the scholars I agree with all think this way, and that's a consensus, right? So in biblical studies, there are pockets of consensus here and there around various issues, but claims of consensus need to be supported. Like, show me data, right? But picking the views of scholars, absolutely. And when you read biblical scholarship, when you read commentaries like T. Meyer or Blenkinsop or Williamson or Summer or any of these biblical scholars, they cherry pick scholars they agree with too. Okay.
Right.
So they say, oh, here, I side with this scholar. I side with that scholar. I believe that this scholar's view has not been refuted yet, or this one has been refuted. So they identify scholars that align with their thinking.
Right.
And so that's something
Both sides
that
can
you'll
be
find.
guilty of it.
Yeah.
Finding scholars that agree with their conclusion.
Yeah. Right. And I've read a lot of scholars who, disagree with me on these. I still read that scholarship. But I just kind of take it for what it is. It's a view, but other scholars have other views based on their biases, their assumptions, their worldviews, their priorities, their agendas. All of those things factor into why a scholar takes a certain view with the consensus or against the consensus or whatever.
Right.
So, but consensus to me doesn't mean very much. Like I really like what Lena Sophia T. Meyer says. She says, I'm just naturally skeptical of consensus. That's what she says in her book. I'm like, yeah, that's good.
We should challenge the consensus.
Yeah, that's a good bias to have, to be skeptical of a consensus. So anyway, that's my view.
And when it comes to, the historicity of the Book of Mormon and Isaiah, there's some people I've spoken to and they would probably agree with the scholarship, and they would say, probably those Deutero-Isaiah chapters weren't written until after Lehi and his family left, and maybe they weren't on the brass plates, and so it's sort of like Midrash or Joe Smith as a co-author, but it's still inspired. I personally find that apologetic I find it difficult to go there because, of the historical claims in the Book of Mormon, and you almost get into this realm that's a bit indistinguishable from fraud or Joe Smith just writing it himself. Like, do you believe that the plausibility for perhaps those maybe primitive writings being on the brass plates, possibly being taken then to the Americas, recorded on the gold plates by Nephi or Jacob or whoever, and then making their way into the Book of Mormon as it was translated by Joe Smith? Or are you open to being midrash or a co-author? Like, what's sort of your view?
Now, I'm totally open to the midrash point of view. Again, Blake Ostler's expansion framework, I think, allows for that, right? However, there are some unique things that take place in Book of Mormon Isaiah, unique differences in the text. You have a couple of things that kind of align with Dead Sea Scrolls Isaiah versus, or I'm sorry, not Dead Sea Scrolls, but
like Septuagint, I think.
The Septuagint Isaiah. Yeah, you have those items that align with Septuagint Isaiah versus the Masoretic text. And I see differences that are so coherent in some parts of Book of Mormon Isaiah that I have a hard time. Like I feel like I'm forced to do more mental gymnastics in light of those items to, come up with this idea that Joseph Smith was this wizard, this textual wizard who who like I just don't think the things that we're describing are humanly possible, is what I'm saying.
So you don't think it's possible that Joe Smith was either copying from a King James Bible when it came to the Isaiah chapters, or because I know none of the witnesses say he had a manuscript or a book, that he was somehow able to memorize them. I know I find that second one highly improbable.
Yeah.
You would need some memory to pull that off,
Yeah.
unless it was by revelation, so to speak. If under more of it maybe a loose translation, but you don't find those sort of critical theories for that explains the Isaiah
No.
chapters.
No, and I guess I can kind of meet critics halfway in a sense. I think so. I don't, a lot of these critical theories I don't reject completely. I think they might be pointing to something valid, right?
Yeah, there's some
And
validity to them.
yeah, and so I personally believe that Joseph Smith had enough exposure to the Isaiah material in the King James Bible to where it stuck. Like it really did, a lot of that stuff just really stuck with him. He
Hmm.
read it. And I think that's true of like his relationship with a lot of the Bible, not just Isaiah.
Yeah, like there's a
Uh,
lot of the New Testament as well
yes.
throughout the Book of Mormon, which I've done a video on, and some critics would say, well, that's anachronistic.
Yeah.
Nephi or Moroni wouldn't have had access to Paul's writings or
Yeah.
Peter or
And
whatever.
that's why I hold to a lot of the loose translation theory. I think
Yes.
there are parts of the Book of Mormon where I see tight translation. There's parts where I think it's loose. There's parts that I'm open to the idea of expansion.
Mhm.
I'm comfortable with all of these three being at work in the process. But I think that Joseph, the King James Bible, formed his mental building blocks. Like he read it, he internalized it. I don't think he was like this voracious memorizer. I just think it like sunk down in his heart and mind at a level that doesn't happen with most people.
Mm.
And so I think with the Book of Mormon, my guess is that was kind of, using his mental building blocks in a loose translation framework, but also mixed in with some tight, like these very specific modifications that show a consistency that, like, I'm sorry, I can't believe that happened by accident, or I just can't. If other
Yeah,
people want to believe that, fine, but I can't believe that it's humanly possible to do all of that.
yeah. And Blake also in our discussion, he talked about how translation is rarely, word for word. There's times it can be tight, times it can be more loose in the language and the vocabulary and sort of like the idioms of the translator. There can be an expansion because you're explaining something, and perhaps we grew up with a very simplistic, it translates word for word. Whether or not this was revelation to his mind and him having to articulate it, or if it was showing on the stone, I think it's all sort of up for dispute.
Yep.
But so when it comes to, so like last sort of question here, when it comes to the Deutero-Isaiah problem, or maybe things with biblical scholarship that people might have issues with, they might find it like it's causing real doubt to their faith, maybe in the historicity of the Book of Mormon, or other issues they might have with the church. What would be your advice to people, specifically with biblical scholarship, but in general who are going through faith struggles when it comes to attacks or criticisms against the Book of Mormon or the church?
So my advice is do the basics of your faith no matter what. Go to church, take the sacrament, pray, study, fast, do the basics that will give you like, hey, I can live the gospel. That's a
Doing the
great,
spiritual things.
yeah, that's a great kind of emotional place to be. Going to church and connecting with other people, making friends, and just kind of these things that the church facilitates. You want to be asking your questions from a place of, hey, I'm okay. Yeah, this is challenging, but I can work through it. Other people work through it. It's hard, but I've got friends and I can I can pray, I can study, I can work through these things. You want to be kind of at that emotional baseline rather than, oh no, it may all be false and I'm terrified and this is horrible. And, that's a different emotional baseline. And sometimes if you're in that latter emotional baseline where you're just consumed with fear and doubt, you might even just gravitate toward voices that validate your fear and doubt, right? Rather than like taking it slow and methodical.
Mm.
So over a period of 5 or 6 years, I've read, a vast amount of Isaiah scholarship and biblical scholarship. It's taken a long time. And I didn't stop living the gospel during that time.
Right. You
I
didn't
said,
put your life
okay,
on hold until you
yeah,
figured it out.
right. Let's see how this plays out. I'm going to study. I'm going to like really study stuff in depth, but let's see how it plays out. I'm not going to put everything on hold and like deny my spiritual experiences over it. Right. But it is hard though. I will just say anybody who's in that situation of doubt, I understand. I really get it. I do. A lot of us do. We've been there.
Yeah.
It's not a fun place to be at all. But you can take it slow. You can work through things.
Yeah.
And
it sounds as well like you would almost encourage people to, similar to what you've done, you've almost dive deeper into research and, you've critically examined things. I don't know if you go as far as say that you've debunked the issue or Deutero-Isaiah,
nope,
but you've definitely shown
I haven't debunked anything.
Yeah, but you've definitely shown that there's complexity and some of the strong evidences pointed to, they can be challenged and those things need to be taken into account and people can come to their own conclusions. But take things slow, be very careful with your research, try to critically examine things, both what critics are saying and maybe faithful scholars as well, and
sure,
stay with something and to include your spiritual experiences as well. Because I know often this happened to me. My first faith crisis is I felt like I had to make a choice: spiritual experiences or facts or evidence and reason. And I just went with that because this is unreliable and just feelings, and how to include that in it as well, because there's usually more complexity to an issue. It's not always just this is the one obvious simple conclusion, which can be frustrating because it can require a lot more energy and you can wrestle with things and you might feel torn and confused. But I think that's part of growing as well and having to evolve and nuance our faith in some ways, that it's not the same simplistic faith we had growing up, but it's being challenged and it's evolving into almost a deeper, more refined faith in some ways.
Yep. I love it.
Yeah. Well, Dan, this has been, I think, a really great episode. I've really appreciated this opportunity to visit with you and to have a discussion about, Deutero-Isaiah for the research that you've done. Everyone, be sure to check out his YouTube channel, Latter-day Presentations. I'll put a link where you can watch his series. It's about 7 episodes on Deutero-Isaiah, and he goes quite in depth, quoting a lot of biblical scholars. So check those out as well, and also check out his Facebook, the Facebook group that you're involved in, Uplift Community of Faith, especially for people who may be in a faith crisis or who maybe are trying to reconstruct their faith and find community. And also, you have a pretty cool coming back story, or I don't think you left the church, but coming back to your faith. And maybe at some point we could do an interview about that, because I thought that was a very cool story. And I think sometimes people can benefit from hearing from people who've gone through a faith crisis, but experiences that restored their faith, and doesn't necessarily have to cause you to lose your faith and leave the church.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dan. Thanks so much. And listeners, if you enjoyed it, like, share, and subscribe to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.